I love you, 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 I love you.
In the early hours of a cold December morning in 1964, a night clerk at a small roadside motel in Los Angeles picked up a revolver and fired 3 shots into the darkness. Minutes later, one of the most powerful voices in American music lay dying on the floor, dressed only in a sport jacket and shoes, his body bearing the marks of panic and confusion. The man was Sam Cooke. To the world, he was elegance, success, and a voice that promised hope and change. But inside that motel, in those final moments, nothing made sense. Why was a global star in a cheap motel at midnight? Why were the witness accounts so different from one another? And why did the official investigation close the case so quickly, leaving questions that have never stopped haunting his family, his fans, and American history itself? Tonight, we slow time down. We return to the final hours of Sam Cooke's life, trace the path that led him to that motel room, and ask the question that has lingered for decades. What really happened in the last moments of Sam Cooke? When the news broke later that morning, it spread with a speed and shock that stunned the country. Sam Cooke was dead at 33. Shot in a motel. Killed by a woman who claimed self-defense. For fans who had just heard his warm, reassuring voice on the radio, the headline felt unreal. This was not how legends were supposed to die. Sam Cooke was polished, articulate, and powerful. He owned his own publishing, challenged the music industry's racial barriers, and stood at the center of a cultural shift that was reshaping America. Within hours, radio stations interrupted programming. Newspapers rushed out special editions. Fellow musicians reacted with disbelief. Some refused to accept the story as it was presented. Others stayed silent, unsure of what to say about a death that felt both sudden and deeply wrong. The contrast was jarring. Only days earlier, Sam Cooke had been planning future recordings and business moves. Now, his name was being linked to police reports, autopsy findings, and a motel most people had never heard of. The official statement came quickly. The motel manager, Bertha Franklin, said she had acted in fear for her life. The police ruled the shooting a justifiable homicide. The case was closed almost as soon as it was opened. But for many, the speed of that conclusion raised more questions than it answered. There was no full trial, no jury, no prolonged investigation. Just a verdict that asked the public to move on. Instead, the opposite happened. Sam Cooke's death became more than a tragedy. It became a cultural wound, a symbol of mistrust, a reminder that even at the height of fame and influence, a black artist in 1964 could die under suspicious circumstances and leave behind more questions than justice. As fans gathered to mourn, another realization began to sink in. This was not only the end of a life, it was the abrupt silencing of a voice that had begun to speak directly to the pain, hope, and demands of a changing America. To understand how Sam Cooke ended up on that motel floor, we have to rewind far beyond that night, back to a childhood shaped by faith, discipline, and expectation, back to a career built on charm, ambition, and control, and back to the unseen pressures that would quietly follow him into his final hours. Long before motel rooms and police reports, Sam Cooke's life began inside a church. Born in Mississippi and raised in Chicago, he was the son of a Baptist minister, surrounded from childhood by discipline, faith, and music that was meant to save souls. By the time he was a teenager, his voice already stood out. Smooth, controlled, and emotionally precise, it carried a kind of authority that made people listen. Gospel was his first stage. With the Soul Stirrers, Sam Cooke became a star within the black church community, admired not just for his talent but for his presence. He dressed sharply, spoke confidently, and understood how to command a room. Even then, he was different. He didn't just sing the music. He studied the business behind it. When he crossed over into pop music in the late 1950s, The move was controversial. Gospel singers were not supposed to chase secular fame, but Sam Cooke saw something others did not. He understood that the voice that moved church congregations could also reach a much larger audience if he controlled how it was presented. And he did control it. Unlike many artists of his era, Sam Cooke negotiated ownership. He demanded creative authority. He built his own publishing and record labels. In an industry that routinely exploited black musicians, he positioned himself as both performer and executive. By the early 1960s, he was everywhere. His songs played on mainstream radio. His image was refined and reassuring. To white audiences, he was safe and charming. To black audiences, he was a symbol of possibility. But behind that polished exterior, pressure was building. Sam Cooke was living in multiple worlds at once. Publicly, he projected confidence and control. Privately, he carried anger, grief, and frustration. He was acutely aware of racism. Even as he benefited from crossover success. When he was arrested for trying to check into a whites-only motel in Louisiana, the experience shook him deeply. Fame had not protected him. That moment changed something. His music began to shift. Songs that once focused on romance and optimism gave way to deeper reflection. A Change Is Gonna Come was not just a hit. It was a response to lived humiliation, fear, and hope wrapped together. At the same time, his personal life grew increasingly complicated. He was a devoted father, but also a man with a reputation for infidelity. His marriage strained under the weight of constant touring, temptation, and loss. When his young son drowned in a family swimming pool, the grief cut deeply and never fully healed. Friends later said Sam Cooke became more guarded after that, more restless. He still smiled in public, but something had cracked beneath the surface. By 1964, he was at a crossroads. Artistically, he was evolving. Politically, he was becoming more outspoken. Financially, he was powerful. But emotionally, he was stretched thin. The expectations placed on him were enormous. To be a voice for change. To be a businessman. To be a symbol. To be flawless. Those pressures did not explode all at once. They accumulated quietly, and they would follow him, step by step, into the final night of his life. By the end of 1964, the public image of Sam Cooke remained intact, but those closest to him could sense the strain. He was moving faster than ever, juggling recording sessions, business meetings, performances, and political expectations. The control he had once mastered was beginning to slip. Friends described a man who was increasingly impulsive, not reckless in a careless sense, but driven by a belief that rules did not apply to him the way they did to others. Fame had opened doors, and over time, it blurred boundaries. Sam Cooke was used to getting what he wanted when he wanted it. There were whispers of affairs, rumors of late nights and risky behavior. None of it reached the public in a way that threatened his career, but it formed a quiet undercurrent in his personal life. At home, tension grew, trust eroded, and the grief over his son's death lingered like an open wound that never fully closed. Professionally, Sam Cooke was also carrying a different kind of weight. He was no longer just an entertainer. He was becoming a figure tied to the civil rights movement, whether he wanted that responsibility or not. His song, A Change Is Gonna Come, was embraced as an anthem, even though it came from a place of deep personal pain. That duality created conflict. Sam Cooke wanted freedom, pleasure, and escape. At the same time, he was expected to embody dignity, restraint, and moral leadership. Those two identities did not always coexist peacefully. As the months passed, people noticed subtle shifts. He slept less. He trusted his instincts more than advice. He took chances that others might have avoided. When friends warned him to slow down, he brushed it off. He had survived the industry. He had beaten the odds. He believed he could handle anything. The night of December 10th was not planned as a dramatic turning point. There was no farewell performance, no ominous public statement, just a series of small decisions that, taken together, would prove irreversible. Sam Cooke went out that evening not as a symbol, but as a man seeking distraction. What happened next would expose how fragile the line between confidence and catastrophe had become. And once he crossed it, there would be no one left to pull him back. In the weeks leading up to his death, Sam Cooke's life appeared outwardly stable. There were no cancelled tours, no public breakdowns, no dramatic signals that something was about to go wrong. On paper, everything looked normal. That illusion is part of what makes the ending so unsettling. Behind the scenes, however, Sam was moving through his days with a growing sense of restlessness. Those close to him later described a man who seemed distracted, sometimes irritable, sometimes unusually relaxed, as if he were slipping in and out of focus. He was still working, still planning, but the emotional grounding that had once steadied him felt less secure. There were conversations that hinted at fatigue, not physical exhaustion, but a deeper weariness. Sam Cooke had spent years navigating the contradictions of his life, and by late 1964, the pressure was constant. Every public appearance carried expectation. On the evening of December 10th, Sam left his home and drove into Los Angeles. What began as an ordinary night out slowly turned into a chain of choices that no one could undo. At some point, he met a young woman named Elisa Boyer. Accounts differ on how they met and what their intentions were, and those differences would later become central to the mystery. What is known is that Sam Cooke checked into the Hacienda Motel with Boyer shortly after midnight. The motel was modest, inexpensive, and far removed from the places a star of his stature would normally stay. That choice alone raised eyebrows later. It did not fit the image. It did not fit the pattern. Inside the room, something went wrong. Boyer would later say she became frightened and fled, taking Sam Cooke's clothing with her. Sam, according to her account, woke up confused, disoriented, and enraged to find himself alone. What happened next unfolded quickly, and largely out of sight. Sam left the room wearing only a jacket and shoes. He went to the motel office, demanding to know where the woman was. Witnesses described him as agitated, shouting, and pounding on the door. It was late. The motel was quiet. The tension was immediate. This was the final stretch of his life. Minutes mattered. Decisions made in confusion would collide with fear, misunderstanding, and violence. As Sam Cooke stood in that motel office, demanding answers, the course of American music history was already seconds away from changing forever. What is known about Sam Cooke's final hours comes from fragments. Police reports, witness statements, testimony given after the fact. There were no cameras, no recordings, no neutral observers, only fear, confusion, and a chain of events that unfolded in the dark. Shortly after midnight, Sam Cooke checked into the Hacienda Motel. He signed the register under a false name. Inside the room, the atmosphere shifted quickly. According to Elisa Boyer, Sam had been drinking. She later claimed she felt trapped, frightened, and unsure how to escape. At some point, while Sam was in the bathroom, she grabbed his clothes and ran. When Sam emerged and realized he was alone, panic set in. What is clear is that he did not calmly assess the situation. He did not call for help. He did not leave the motel to search outside. Instead, he stormed out of the room, still wearing only a jacket and shoes, and went straight to the motel office. Inside that office was Bertha Franklin, the motel manager. It was late. She was alone. When Sam began pounding on the door, shouting demands, she later said she believed she was about to be assaulted. Witnesses reported hearing raised voices, Sam Cooke demanding to know where the woman was, Bertha Franklin telling him to leave. The situation escalated in seconds, not minutes. At some point, Sam forced his way into the office. What happened next depends entirely on whose account is believed. Bertha Franklin stated that Sam attacked her, grabbing and threatening her. She said she feared for her life. In response, she reached for a revolver and fired 3 shots. One struck Sam in the chest. Another hit his hand. A third struck his head. Sam Cooke collapsed onto the floor. By the time police arrived, the voice that had carried the weight of a generation was silent. Paramedics pronounced him dead at the scene. He was 33 years old. The official timeline moved quickly after that. The police accepted Bertha Franklin's account. There were no signs of robbery, no evidence of premeditation. Within hours, the death was ruled a justifiable homicide. But even in those first moments, questions lingered. Why was Sam Cooke so disoriented? Why did no one attempt to de-escalate the situation? Why did the investigation end so abruptly? The answers would never be fully agreed upon. In the days that followed, the official narrative settled quickly into place. The Los Angeles Police Department stood by its conclusion. Bertha Franklin had acted in self-defense. The case, they said, was clear. But outside the police station, doubt began to grow. Sam Cooke's family did not accept the ruling. Neither did many of his friends, colleagues, or fans. The speed of the investigation raised immediate concern. There was no full trial, no cross-examination of witnesses in open court, no extended forensic review presented to the public. A coroner's inquest ruled the death justified, and the legal process ended almost as soon as it began. For some, that was the most troubling detail of all. Accounts from that night did not fully align. Elisa Boyer's story shifted over time, and her credibility would later be questioned due to subsequent arrests unrelated to Sam Cooke's case. Bertha Franklin's version of events, while accepted by authorities, left gaps that were never publicly addressed. Why did a confrontation escalate so quickly to lethal force? Why were alternative explanations not explored more thoroughly? There were also broader questions shaped by the era itself. 1964 was a time of racial tension, mistrust of institutions, and deep systemic inequality. Sam Cooke was not just a celebrity. He was a black man with money, influence, and growing political consciousness. To many in the black community, the idea that his death could be so swiftly ruled justified felt familiar, even predictable. Rumors began to circulate. Some suggested the incident was a setup. Others believed it was a tragic convergence of fear and misunderstanding, amplified by alcohol, power dynamics, and racial bias. Still others argued that no conspiracy was necessary, only human panic and poor decisions colliding at the worst possible moment. None of these theories were ever proven. What remained was uncertainty, a sense that the truth lived somewhere between official statements and lived experience, a feeling that the final chapter of Sam Cooke's life had been closed without being fully read. As the years passed, the case faded from active investigation but never from memory. Every anniversary, every documentary, every new generation discovering his music reopened the same questions, not because the answers were clear, but because they never were. Sam Cooke's death became one of those stories history does not resolve. It lingers, it unsettles, and it forces each listener to confront the uncomfortable space between law, justice, and truth. When Sam Cooke was laid to rest, the world mourned more than a man. It mourned a voice that had helped define an era. His songs did not fade with his death. They grew heavier, deeper, and more complicated. Lyrics that once sounded hopeful now carried an ache that could not be separated from how his life ended. "A Change Is Gonna Come" became more than a song. It became a mirror. Each note echoed the tension of a country in transition, and the personal cost carried by those who dared to stand at the intersection of art, race, and power. Knowing how Sam Cooke died, listeners could no longer hear that song without imagining the motel hallway, the raised voices, and the sudden finality of 3 gunshots. His legacy is not clean or simple. It is human. Sam Cooke was brilliant, ambitious, generous, and flawed. He broke barriers in the music industry, insisted on ownership when few artists could, and helped pave the way for generations who followed. At the same time, he carried pain, made risky choices, and trusted that his status could protect him in moments when it could not. Looking back from the lens of his final hours, his life reads differently. Not as a straight line to tragedy, but as a series of pressures quietly accumulating. Fame did not shield him from fear. Success did not remove danger, and confidence, in the wrong moment, became vulnerability. There is no single lesson in Sam Cooke's death, no tidy conclusion that explains everything. What remains is a question that lingers long after the music stops. How many warning signs are overlooked when a life appears successful from the outside? And how many stories like this end not because of one mistake, but because of many small ones no one thought would matter? Sam Cooke's voice still plays on the radio. It still fills rooms with warmth and promise. But his final moments remind us of something quieter and more unsettling. Even legends can find themselves alone, misunderstood, and out of time. And when the music fades, what we are left with is not just a mystery, but a responsibility. To listen more closely, to look deeper, and to remember that behind every iconic voice is a fragile human life, moving hour by hour toward a moment no one ever plans to face. The story ends here, but the questions never truly do.